Now, I would just like to interrupt this broadcast with some breaking news out of Europe. Reports now that Pope Francis, the pontiff, has passed away. We'll take you now live to Sky News UK.
Been in, and it was the longest time that we'd had him be out of public view. He was in hospital for about 5 weeks, and during that time we'd heard an audio message from him, but we didn't really see him. There was one occasion when he came to the window, and the Vatican also released a photograph of him while he was in hospital. But he was in a very critical condition during that time, and then about 5 weeks after that they said that he was in a stable condition, so he had come out of intensive care and was in a regular ward. His vital signs had become steady and he was ready to go home, and he was sent home with 24-hour medical care. He had oxygen to hand if he needed it, and he was ordered to rest for about 2 months, and that was, his release from hospital just a mere few weeks ago.
You're watching Sky News, breaking news in the past few moments. Important news that the Vatican has announced that Pope Francis has died. He was 88. The pontiff had been in increasingly frail health in recent months and died in the Vatican after receiving treatment in Rome for a respiratory tract infection in previous months. Francis had been Pope since March 2013, following the resignation of his predecessor, Benedict XVI. He was born in the Argentine capital, Buenos Aires, a city where he was later made Archbishop.
That is breaking news across the world as we speak.
Yep. Old Pope Francis has kicked the bucket, y'all. It's unfortunate. Pope Francis, born Jorge Mario Bergoglio, died on Monday, April the 21st, 2025, at the age of 88 years old, following a cerebral stroke that led to a coma and cardiovascular collapse. His death has come shortly after a 5-week hospitalization for double pneumonia, for which he had recently returned to the Vatican to recover. On Easter Sunday, April the 20th, he made his final public appearance, riding through St. Peter's Square in his Pope-mobile. I always wanted one of those. Like, the Pope-mobile is fresh. To greet the crowds, despite expressing hesitation due to his failing health. His personal nurse, Massimiliano Strappetti, reported that Francis thanked him for encouraging the outing, describing the pontiff as tired but content afterward. By Monday morning, his condition deteriorated rapidly, with signs of illness appearing around 5:30 in the morning, and he ended up dying at 7:35 in the morning. Following his death, his body was placed in an open coffin at St. Peter's Basilica for public viewing from Wednesday, April 23rd to Friday, April the 25th, drawing tens of thousands of mourners, with approximately 25,000 visiting on the first day alone. His funeral was held Saturday, April the 26th his funeral will be held on Saturday, April the 26th at 10 a.m. in St. Peter's Square, and will be attended by world leaders, including Donald Trump, our President John Trump, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, and the Prince of Wales. Francis requested a toned-down funeral with a single coffin rather than the traditional 3, and expressed for his wish to be buried at the Basilica of St. Mary Major, though it is uncertain if this will be honored. The Vatican itself has entered a 9-day mourning period, and preparations are underway for a conclave to elect his successor. I've heard that they might have a black pope. I've heard this. I've heard that the pope might be black in the near future. I doubt it, but I'm hearing it's a possibility. Apparently there are no clear front runners, but the main candidates are Luis Antonio Tagle from the Philippines, Cardinal Pietro Parolin from Italy. Those seem to be the most likely to take the reign of the papacy, or the papacy, or whatever it's called. Now, Francis himself was the first Latin American and Jesuit pope, and was noted for his progressive views on poverty and his efforts to reform the Catholic Church over his 12-year papacy. Now, Pope Francis was considered, like I said, a very progressive figure. I am not a Catholic. I am a Christian. But I'll just say this: of all the popes that I've seen in my life, which is really only, I guess, John Paul and Pope Benedict, and now Pope Francis was by far the best of the Catholic Church. He wasn't perfect. We're going to get into that in a few minutes. He certainly has some things he needed to answer for in his life, just like all of the popes. But of all the popes that we had, he was definitely the one who had the least amount of stench on him that I could see, mostly because he was a realist, and he actually had something that all Christians are supposed to have: compassion. I know this is a novel concept, especially in this world where the right wing has come to dominate discussions about religion and faith. But starting out with the idea that the people that you don't agree with are less than and don't deserve empathy and don't deserve sympathy for their plights is not generally Christ-like. At least not from the New Testament Bible that I read. Pope Francis took Jesus's message of caring and being empathetic to all people to heart, for the most part. Okay. Some of my favorite quotes from the Pope: he said, God is not a magician. He said, we risk imagining God as a magician with a magic wand, but that's not how it is. He also, unlike a lot of people in communities of faith, he supported the theory of evolution. He said evolution doesn't contradict creation. It requires it. Anybody who's ever written a song, which I have, you know that. Anybody who's ever painted a picture or drawn a sketch or anything, you know that our art requires constant evolution. There's a constant evolution in our art and what we're doing. He cared about climate change and made it a central theme to a lot of his statements. He said, the earth looks more and more like an immense pile of filth. He talked about the effect of capitalism and the greed of the wealthy and helping to create that situation. He redefined what it meant to be in service. He said, we don't serve ideas, we serve people. And that's a very important distinction, because a lot of people, this is why so many young people have left the church over the years. So many people in the church are about serving, about doctrine. They are about doctrine. They are dogmatic people, but they're not about people, which is what Jesus was about. Jesus was about people. He wasn't just about doctrine. He urged for global unity. He made many statements in favor of global unity. He said, we are one human family. We need each other. He spoke out against mass deportations. He was a central part of the talks between the United States and Cuba. When Obama, one of the best things Obama did during his presidency was restore relations with Cuba. Pope Francis was a part of that. Now, obviously, Donald Trump and Joe Biden both went back on that, but it was a nice thing while it was happening to end, to at least let the blockade thaw out some, that the entire world generally votes against in the United Nations. And it is important to say that the entire world outside of the United States, and I believe Israel, the blue and white country, consistently say that the blockade against Cuba is wrong and inhumane, and it is. He spoke out against the injustices of capitalism. He denounced neoliberalism as a scourge on humanity. If you listen to this show on a regular basis, you know I'm right there with him. Neoliberalism destroyed the Democratic Party thanks to the Clintons and Obama, and it will not be FDR and LBJ's party again until they finally get rid of neoliberalism once and for all. The economic policies of Ronald Reagan and the conservative right, ironically, the Republicans are getting away from neoliberalism, getting away from globalization, and they're the ones who inflicted it on us in the first place. And now the Democrats are the ones who defend it and are entrenched in it. Trickle-down economics. Isn't that something? Wow. He also said, no one can accept the precepts of neoliberalism and consider themselves Christian. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, the cruelty of neoliberalism, the trickle-down economics, the austerity, the colonizing of public good and the public good by corporations and by the elites, that is absolutely as un-Christ-like of an ideology as there could possibly be. And just last week we talked about the amount of wealth that has funneled from working class people to the richest people in our world over the last 50 years, $79 trillion. $79 trillion. $79 trillion.
Money, money, money.
Yes, money, money, money. $79 trillion. If the wealth that split, the wealth divide split that we had in the 1970s had continued, just the 1970s. Just ask anybody who was alive during then. I'm sure most of them will tell you that America was not a socialist country during the 1970s. I wasn't alive at that point, but from everything I've heard, I don't remember hearing that America was a socialist country during the 1970s. If American workers had continued to take the same amount of the economic pie that they did at that point, since then, the working classes would be $79 trillion richer. And so instead, the wealthiest people have taken that piece of the pie, and now they're $79 trillion richer. And the Pope was one of the main detractors of this ideology of corporate neoliberalism, the most rancid form of capitalism that has, turned our world into what it is now. This is why a few banks own everything. This is why a few media companies own everything. This is how you get to this point where a few people own and control everything. A few people have all the wealth in your society. This is how you get to that point. Pope Francis also positioned himself as an anti-war pope, which is a good thing. Again, last time I checked, Jesus was not a pro-war person. He criticized Israel. He criticized NATO because those are the two most destructive forces on the planet currently. And he even said that Israel's actions in Gaza are terrorism. That's the word he used to describe. That's the word he used to describe what was going on in Gaza. Terrorism. He said it was cruelty, not war. And it's important to state, Palestine doesn't have a military. Even if you buy the nonsense they're selling about October 7th, that still does not justify the amount of terrorism being inflicted on a civilian population that you're seeing in Gaza currently. And that's what it is, terrorism. It'd be like if our government decided they were going to bomb Chicago to bits because the gangster disciples did something. Well, the gangster disciples, they robbed a bank and they shot 4 people, so we're just going to bomb the entire city of Chicago and kill everybody because a few gangster disciples did this or that. You see how irrational and illogical that is? That's what the Pope was saying. He actually was beloved in Palestine by Palestinian people, Pope Francis was, because he was compassionate to their plight. He used to actually call the main Christian church in Palestine every night for years. Throughout this whole genocide, he called that Catholic church every night to check on them and make sure they were okay. So, you know, when it comes to those types of things, the Pope was definitely somebody who had a strong moral compass in some ways. Now, like a lot of people, he was a complex individual, especially a lot of people in power. He was not a perfect man whatsoever. You know, this is somebody who in the 70s, he collaborated with the fascist military dictatorship in Argentina that we, the United States government, helped put in power, of course, as we helped put most of the fascist governments in power, at least a lot of them. He was the head of the Jesuit mission in the country. He never spoke out against the regime for obvious reasons. He actually worked with them to persecute priests that were leftists. So, you know, again, I'm not saying like I said, the Pope did had a lot of cool attributes, and we should celebrate those, but we should not completely whitewash the man's history as well. Orlando Yorio and Francisco Yalix, they were Jesuits who worked under Pope Francis, who was then just Cardinal Bergoglio, I guess. They were slum priests. They worked with the poor in the south of Buenos Aires in the 70s. And in 1976, they were arrested and tortured by the dictatorship for being subversives. And unfortunately, Pope Francis, when he was in charge there in Argentina, in their Catholic church, he helped facilitate that. He withdrew official Jesuit protection from them, which allowed the military to detain them. So it's unfortunate that, you know, he did not have the moral fortitude or the courage to protect his priests, or to at least stand with his priests. That is what Jesus would have done. So in that way, he did fall short. Also, you know, the Catholic Church has, over the years, come under great fire for their sexual abuse scandals. I think we all know that. We all know that. Pope Francis's hands, allegedly, are not completely clean. I actually, about 5 years ago, I think it was 5 years ago, I want to say 2019. I guess that'd be 6 years ago now. I actually did a story here at WLTH when I was still doing the Counterpoint segments on this actress, celebrity, / sex worker named Natasha Jait. She was actually one of Argentina's more famous celebrities. I guess she was the equivalent of, you know, a showgirl or something. She was kind of, she's sort of the type of woman you'd see in, say, Playboy magazine. I guess a Pamela Anderson or something, that type of figure in Argentina. And she was a celebrity, she was an actress, she was also a sex worker, and that's important because in her work as a sex worker, she had for years gone undercover and documented a lot of the sex abuse that she was witnessing behind the scenes in the upper echelons of Argentinian society. She actually exposed a lot of celebrities in Argentina for being pedophiles, straight up pedophiles. She exposed politicians, she exposed soccer players, and one of the people that she exposed was a man named Gustavo Vera. Gustavo Vera was a friend of Pope Francis. Gustavo Vera was frequently photographed with Pope Francis when he was still Archbishop Jorge Bergoglio, and was allegedly involved in a child sex trafficking ring operating in junior division soccer clubs in the South American country. And it is alleged that Pope Francis helped protect Gustavo Vera. Now, this woman, and I talked about this in the story, check it out on Scott Cannon Radio. I talked about this when this happened way back in 2019. This woman actually, obviously she came under a lot of fire and got a lot of death threats. And so she released a statement that said, "I will not commit suicide. I won't be bought off, and I won't drown in a bathtub, and I won't shoot myself in the head. So if that happens, it wasn't me." Save this tweet. She made the allegations that Pope Francis saved Gustavo Vera from saved another clergyman from accusations of pedophilia and actually sent him to manage a shelter for disadvantaged boys. And so, unfortunately, this woman, who's, again, one of the bigger celebrities in Argentina at the time, who was on TV regularly, she makes these allegations. She tells everybody she's not going to kill herself and she's not going to do drugs and she's not going to overdose and all this other stuff. She ends up being found dead at a party, stripped naked, and they just say, well, it was a drug overdose. Now, again, I can't say that the Pope had anything to himself to do with that, but I am saying that at the time of her death, that was the accusation she was making, that Pope Francis and his friend Gustavo Vera were involved in some heavy things involving children. And we know the Catholic Church's history. Now, for his part, Pope Francis has apologized for the Catholic Church and said that they didn't do enough to solve that problem and didn't do enough to protect victims of child sex abuse. But he's one of those people who did not do enough. He did not radically reform the church in any meaningful way to stop it from happening. So All I'm saying is Pope Francis had some very good attributes. He really did. He was a he had some good attributes. You know, he seemed to really care about poor people, at least on some level. He seemed to be willing to take a stand against the military-industrial complex and NATO and the blue and white country that will get you kidnapped off the street if you talk about them too much. But he also had a lot of things that I think that he should have been held accountable for in his personal life as well. I will say, whoever they pick as Pope coming up, I don't think he will be as pro-poor and pro-working class and as, at least overtly, pro-human as Pope Francis. I hate to say that, but I really do think that they will go with a right-wing Pope, because many Catholics have over the years complained that Pope Francis wasn't a real Catholic because he just showed too much mercy to too many people. He blessed divorced people, he blessed gay people and lesbian people. Basically, he just said be a decent human being. And so we need to take the good parts of Pope Francis and, you know, honor those, but we should not turn a blind eye at some of the other, you know, more sketchy parts of his history as well. All right, folks, when we come back, Maha making big moves. RFK Jr. making big moves, essentially taking the poison out of our food. Who would thought that would be controversial? We'll be right back after these.